What just changed? Okay. So am I live?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, hello, everyone. This is your good friend, Professor John Boyer, coming at you once again from the Arctic polar vortex that is Blacksburg, Virginia, currently hung here in a ball of ice. Hopefully everybody is keeping warm, keeping the home fires lit, as it were, wherever you may be hailing from. But in this part of the world, it's damn cold, and it looks like we got another week of sub-zero temperatures ahead of us. But that's not going to prevent I, the Plaid Avenger, from coming back at you with another world lesson about things that are going on out there on the globe that perhaps are not getting enough attention in the global press, and or perhaps more appropriately, you don't understand, or that people aren't explaining it to you, or it's something that you, or many of us, including the President of the United States, who doesn't really see the value of the bigger picture of what's going on, but I actually do. So are we working, or are we still working? Okay.
No, you keep going.
Oh, okay.
Instagram's having some issues.
Instagram's having issues because we love Instagram. And so what I want to talk about tonight is a collection of news stories that I have been following. For the last 6 months, I've seen these things kind of start to unfold. And then in a flurry of activity in just the last couple weeks, I can't help it but to say, hey, there's a significantly important global trend happening right now that not enough people are talking about, or not enough people understand, and that is that global free trade is not just alive and well, but it is actually growing despite the grandiose efforts of one U.S. President, Donald Trump. And in fact, this podcast is entitled, and now I don't know if you have to stop because I have to go to the presentation. So, oh, you're still working. Okay, I'll keep chatting. I'll keep chatting.
Going. Here you go.
I should have asked if anybody can actually see or hear me first. So I'll do that while Katie's trying to fix Instagram. But tonight's podcast is going to be called Global Trade, or I'm sorry, Free Trade Trumps Trump. Now, any of you are hardcore Donald Trump MAGA fans, don't be put off. You can still learn something from this too, because it's not all about the moves that Donald Trump has been making for the last year. It's more about what the globe's reaction is to the things that Donald Trump has been up to for the last year. So this is not a personal assault on the MAGA Donald Trump or his followers. This is more, hey man, the world is changing fast because of things that Donald Trump is doing, but the world is reacting in ways that none of us could have really predicted, and in speeds that I myself have been amazed to see that, I didn't think things were going to happen like this. So once again, if you're just tuning in, did you get it fixed, Katie? Or are you still working? So Instagram's off.
Yeah, I'm going to use this.
Okay. Sure. Well, how would I tune in? Let me see if people are tuning in while you try to set that up, and then we'll relaunch everything once you have Instagram on board. So, hi, everyone. Can you see me and or hear me? And I will go to the chat rooms to see if that indeed is occurring. And I see Wabibi145 back in the hizzle. Welcome back, Wabibi, saying, what's up? I see R-Cover C, who's tuned in early this week. Good to have you back, R-Cover C, with the Velociraptor scream. Gabriel Barbaro says, a bello from Italy. Wow, that's awesome. Thanks so much, Gabriel. And let's see, Mexican Goose back in the house. Welcome back. Says, yes, we can hear and see you. Michael Piriano says, whoop, Sunday Plaid Podcast has been, Sunday Plaid Podcast and a beer. What a perfect Sunday night. Bam. And it does sound like a perfect Sunday night. JMR Manolo says, here in Twitch, everything cool. All right. So we've got 2 or 3 of the 4 or 5 platforms that we're streaming to working. Katie's still desperately scrambling to get us on Instagram. But how you folks been doing? Is it freezing where you are? I hope it's not in Italy anyway, because we have been getting whammied here in Blacksburg, home of Virginia Tech, for the last, what has it been, 2 weeks now? We started off, or just a week, and then a week ago or more, we got 5 or 6 inches of snow / mostly just sleet, or some snow and then 2 inches of sleet on top that just packed it all down. And it hasn't really warmed up enough to melt most of it, or any of it really. And then we got snowed on again on Friday night and Saturday night. And so here it is Sunday. We're like, oh, we're in a significant winter situation here. And lo and behold, all this is happening the day before the greatest holiday of the year. That's right, woodchuck chuckers, it's Groundhog's Day tomorrow. So this is a little pre-Groundhog Day celebration with a Sunday night post-supper plaidcast. All right, are you ready to go? So now we're welcoming everybody from Twitch as well. I'm sorry, not Twitch. We got Twitch, we got Facebook, we got Insta. We're back.
Google.
And Google.
YouTube.
And YouTube. I'm too old. I can't keep up with all the apps, with all the programs. Who you calling program? Does anybody know what movie that's from? And so now it's official. I can welcome everybody to, what is this, our 4th? Sunday night post-supper plaid podcast. I will be your host, Professor John Boyer, a.k.a. the Plaid Avenger, recently retired from Virginia Tech, home of the Fighting Hokies here in Southwest Virginia. And for those that have not heard me say this yet, tonight's podcast is Free Trade Trumps Trump. And once again, I'll shout it out to the Mega MAGA fans. This is not a personal indictment or attack on the President of the United States, Donald Trump. This is more things that are occurring out on the planet and occurring faster than even this plaid podcaster could have wildly imagined would have happened this quickly. Now, let me shout out just a few people here in the chat room, and then we will get back to the regular programming. And let's see who's jumped in here. We've got, Blue Wolf. Can never read that font, Blue Wolf. It's so blue. Says, ready for more information tonight. Welcome back, Blue Roof. Cold in Italy, but not freezing, says Gabriella. Fire sea pineapple, says Tron. Whew, good call. Nailed that quote. Nice job, pineapple. Wabibi says, Professor Boyer, please keep doing this every week. You got it, Wabibi. I'm on it. We're still in the dabbling phase, trying to figure out how to stream these things on different formats and what kind of graphics we should have and all that other things. I do want to start a whole show on whiskey. I want to start a whole show on wine. I am getting into the plaidcasting spirit of things, as it were. I have been retired for a full 6 months, so it's time for me to get off my ass and go back to work. And it's going to be here on the online digital world before AI steals my image and just starts plaidcasting in my place, which would be hilarious. Let's see. I got Michael Periano says, would you agree with Peter Zayan's assessment that America's march towards isolationism has been uninterrupted since before Trump? My own words here, Trump tariffs being a natural extension of this. Well, Michael, and this is what we're going to talk about tonight, the United States is certainly moving into a hardcore isolationist stance, but not by their own design. At this point, I would agree with you. Zayan has said, Peter Zayan, who I know who that is. I've not seen the specific podcast you're talking about. But Michael's translating Peter Zayan, another podcaster, who's saying that the United States has been moving towards isolation for a while. Sure. You should. I'll start with this. The United States, I read this book from the 70s. It's literally a book from the 70s I had on my shelf forever, called Isolationism and Interventionism. And it's a history of U.S. foreign policy. And that book was written 50 freaking years ago. So what I will try to impart to you very quickly, Michael and Peter Zayan, is that, sure, the United States is moving towards isolationism. This isn't the first rodeo for the United States moving towards isolationism. You could actually look at the entirety of the United States' history in foreign policy as a series of of retreating from the world, from retracting back from the world and isolating, and then reversing and intervening and going all in and doing stuff. And you can, the quick answer or the quick examples here, like every major war the U.S. has been in is an example of an intervention where they went out in the world. They went out and helped Europe in World War II. The Vietnam, we went out into Southeast Asia. We went out into the Middle East. So, and then the U.S. citizenry gets over it or gets tired of it. The United States is over the money, and they retract. And so saying that the U.S. is moving into isolationism, I'm like, well, sure, that is cyclical. But I would agree that this cycle is reaching its maximum zenith way quicker than anybody could have predicted. And it mostly is due to Donald Trump's war on the world with this tariff stuff, which is what we're going to talk about tonight. And I'm getting way ahead of myself here. But the current U.S. president and his administration have wildly underestimated how quickly the rest of the world would stop paying attention to America. That's why this is accelerating so quickly. And again, I'm not anti-America. I love America. I think America's one of the greatest countries on planet Earth. One of, not the, one of. And because we have been built on ideals and done things, and the U.S. has made plenty of mistakes in the past, but always idealistically trying to do the right thing in the bigger picture. You can't say that about most countries. Throughout history, most countries have been completely self-absorbed, completely selfish, completely imperialistic, completely vindictive. And so the United States has always been kind of an exception. And we call that exceptionalism for people who say, rah, rah, the U.S. is the greatest country ever, and no one's ever like us because we're so exceptionally different. I'm not that hardcore that we're exceptionally different and no one is like us at all. But I would say that, yes, the United States, from its origin story, is a kind of unique story for the history of the world when it comes to empires, kingdoms, empires, states, the like. The U.S. is kind of different, and it is kind of a cool place. And we have kind of done things that overall we kind of look at ourselves as the good guys. And unlike a lot of other empires and kingdoms and tyrants in history, most of the rest of the world has looked to the U.S. as the good guys too. And if you're from a foreign country or been a victim of some bad atrocity that the U.S. caused, I'm sure you're going to take exception and be like, "You're full of it, Professor. You don't know what you're talking about." There are tons of exceptions. The U.S. has done, again, plenty of bad things. But it would be hard for you or anyone to argue with me that the vast majority of people on planet Earth do kind of look to the U.S. as the good guys. Not the Russians, obviously. but most everybody else. Why else would so many people want to come to the United States? Why else have so many people looked to the United States as a beacon of hope and light for what humanity can do? Why else is it the United States is the one who put a man on the moon, a human on the moon? Why else is it that the United States, up till right now, up to the very present, was one of the biggest, if not the biggest, international donor to charities and most UN projects, and the United States has propped up NATO and the UN. And the U.S., and now I am starting to sound like I'm an exceptionalist. The U.S. is the greatest. The U.S., for the last 80 years, has been the shining light on the hill. And because it's the United States, has been very involved in world affairs. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. But it is a little different than most other countries in that respect. And now the United States is internally decided we're going to pull back from our role as the world leader. And it has been happening slowly over the course of the last decade, let's say. But it has been exponentially hastened by Donald Trump, U.S. President Donald Trump, and his current war on the world of free trade. So that's what I wanted to talk about tonight, because that's what's caught my eye. Just in the last few weeks, a whole bunch of stuff has happened. Isolated kind of stories from around the world. But we, the Plaid Party, we're going to start a third party in the United States, a third political party, the Plaid political party. We in the Plaid party try to look at what's happening in the bigger picture, what's happening in the whole world, what we want to understand better. And so I've been looking at these separate stories, and I see a trend that I want to impart to you all today. Specifically, what am I referring to? Well, just in the literally last week, you've had really big trade deals that are going down between the European Union and India. The German chancellor has visited India to make separate deals. The EU have just inked a deal with India. China and Canada in the last couple of weeks have inked a trade deal. And even before that, China and ASEAN countries have inked deals and expanded trade. So this is kind of like, wait a minute, what? We're used to the United States kind of being the epicenter of world trade. And the United States has forever been the staunchest defender and, quite frankly, creator of world trade. So what's going on that most of the free trade and trade in general is going on in the rest of the world and not in the epicentered in the United States? Well, you know some of the answers already, because the world is doing lots of trade deals with itself. Countries all over the world are actually stepping up. Big countries and small countries and middle-sized countries are all picking up the gauntlet of free trade and not letting it wither under the United States' determined leadership to kill free trade. There has been more action on free trade in other countries besides the United States, more in the last 6 months than I can think of in the last 60 years. And that is precisely because what's going on in Trump world? Well, the U.S. president has led a war against free trade for the last 13 months solid. Some of this started in his first term. For those of you that were in my classes in the last 5 years when this is 8 years ago now, 9 years ago, when Trump first took office. Was that 2016? 2016. One of the very first things that U.S. President Trump did in his first term, one of the first thing, I should ask questions, but this is too deep of a pull on people's memory that I don't know that they'd get something this trivial. But when I was for those of you that took my class in 2016, 2017, 2018, does anybody remember what the very first, literally the first thing Donald Trump did when he took office in 2016? I'll give it 5 seconds while I take a sip. Anybody in the chat room remember what was Donald Trump's first international act when he took office in 2016? Didn't think so. It's too hard. It's too trivial. It's too hard. The very first thing Donald Trump did 9 years ago was pull the United States out of a free trade bloc that was just forming called APEC. Asian Pacific Economic Coalition? I think it was cooperation. APEC. And APEC was created by the United States of America. And it was a free trade bloc of all of the countries along the Pacific Rim. Wasn't that a great sci-fi film, Pacific Rim? But the Pacific Rim meaning all the countries that border the Pacific Ocean, with the exception of China, were invited to be in this free trade bloc led by the United States. And it was countries, everybody from U.S., Canada, Mexico. I'm pretty sure Peru was in it. I know Chile was in it. I think Colombia was in it. I know New Zealand was in it. Australia, maybe Indonesia, Japan, South Korea, probably Vietnam. Yep, Vietnam was in it, because I remember talking about how weird is this? Vietnam, a country the U.S. went to war with for a decade, is now in a free trade bloc with the United States. So a lot of countries, with the exception of China, were invited to be in this free trade bloc. And Donald Trump's first act was, and this is again 9 years ago, he's like, I hate free trade. The U.S. has been screwed for decades because of free trade. It's all terrible. And I do believe in his heart of hearts, he's doing it for a good thing. In his mind, a good thing. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk about trade in general before we get to why Donald Trump is so far against it. So you know what's happening, what's been happening for the last 13 months. But again, it started 9 years ago with Donald Trump pulling the U.S. out of APEC, which, by the way, APEC kept going, and APEC is still there. The United States is just not in it. And so here's just a little map of all of the current Trump tariff targets around planet Earth that people are doing deals, trying to do deals. Some of them have 10% tariffs, some of them 50% tariffs, some of them 100% tariffs, completely on the whim of the President of the United States. By the way, that has never really happened before. This is going up, I believe it's at the U.S. Supreme Court that's being challenged of, does the U.S. President, is he in charge of all economic activity for the country as well? Because historically, they're not. Historically, the U.S. President is 100% in charge of the military. The U.S. President is 100% in charge of the executive branch. The U.S. President is 100% in charge of building his cabinet and posting people up in the federal government for major divisions and major jobs and all that stuff. It's not very clear that the U.S. president by himself is 100% in charge of economics for the entire country. This is new, and that's what's being challenged at the U.S. Supreme Court right now. My guess is the U.S. Supreme Court's not really that supreme about anything anymore. They're not my Supreme Court. They're supreme, so they're the unsupremely court in my mind. So they're just a rubber stamp for U.S. President Donald Trump at this point. So they're not even I can't fathom that they'll go up against Trump on this trade thing. It's just so new. The current U.S. Supreme Court just kind of says whatever Trump wants is fine with us. So it's being challenged. I doubt it will come to anything. But what has Trump done? Literally in the last 13 months, 35% tariffs against all Canadian products. I believe there was also 35% against, or 25% against all Mexican products. 10 to 20%, at one point up to 100% against China. And as you all well know, this stuff has been very fluid. It happens very fast. Donald Trump is impetuous. He gets into a mood. He gets into a Twitter rant and just decides, well, it's 100% against China because they did something today I didn't like. Again, this is all very new. This is never the way U.S. economic policy has ever been run in the history of the United States. And so China, 10, 20, 50, 100, depending on the day of the week. And then, of course, they had this big Liberation Day where Donald Trump was suggesting that somehow the U.S. economy was going to be free by putting anywhere from 10 to 40% tariffs on random countries around the world. I do remember the one that was weird was he put like a 65% tariff on all goods from Vietnam, of all places. Here, I come back to Vietnam already. I don't know what bee was in his bonnet about Vietnam. Maybe he only knew the Vietnam War and never understood why it happened. But very punitive tariffs against certain countries that, again, most of us couldn't figure out what those were about. And some of them have been lowered and some of them have stayed in place. And he's threatened to raise them in other places. Brazil got a 40% tariff. And Brazil has pissed off Trump because Trump's buddy Bolsonaro, the former president of Brazil, who's been indicted for corruption charges, is currently in jail. Donald Trump says, you better let him go or I'm going to tariff you more. And again, you're like, that's a political thing. Tariffs are an economic tool. Why are you mixing the tool here? So Donald Trump uses them perhaps for good reason, but often just for personal vendettas. So that's, again, very odd. India had a 25 to 50% tariff that got jacked really hard, maybe even higher, because India refused to stop buying Russian oil because they've been buying Russian oil for 100 years. So that made Donald Trump mad, and he slapped a very high punitive tariff against India and kind of called off a free trade pact that the United States and India were trying to form for the last, 20 years. And of course, anybody that bought Venezuelan oil, he put tariffs on. They also had sector-specific tariffs on steel and aluminum. Anybody selling any steel and aluminum to the United States, an extra 50%. Same with automobile parts, an extra 25%. Pharmaceuticals, 100%. So if you're selling brand name pharmaceuticals from anywhere on planet Earth to the United States, 100% tariff. That means it doubles the price. And I think he wrangled some deals to say if you start a company, if you start a manufacturing business in the United States to make those drugs here, we'll lower the tariffs for now. Again, this stuff is also happening so quickly and convoluted, and it changes daily, so it's hard to tell hard and fast rules and facts of what's going on right this second. Tariffs on lumber and furniture, particularly from Canada. Tariffs on copper. The list goes on. And then the most recent huge kind of, I like to use the word debacle because it does seem like a debacle, was that when Donald Trump threw this kind of tantrum saying that the United States has to have Greenland at all cost, and the European countries, fellow NATO members, said, hey, that's not cool. We're going to push back on that. And so in an effort to, I don't know what they were doing actually. A bunch of European countries sent like soldiers, and I say soldiers, like 2 or 3 dudes in camo, to Greenland to do some exploratory stuff. Donald Trump took that as a military challenge, and that's when he started saying that we're going to militarily invade, and then he took it back at Davos and said, no, we're not going to militarily invade. So Trump got mad about the movement of European soldiers into Greenland, so he slapped 10 to 25% tariffs on all the countries who were pushing back against his Greenland gambit, and threatened way more until the Europeans threatened to have a bazooka tariff on all U.S. goods. And I don't even know if that settled out yet. Now that the Trump administration is targeting Iran, they're saying 25% tariffs on all goods coming from any country that trades with Iran, to try to further isolate Iran. And the same with Cuba. The Trump administration said anybody that sends any oil or anything to Cuba, we're going to put 100% tariffs on all of the goods that you send to the United States. So this has been Tariff Mania, 13 months of tariff terror. So why is all of this so shocking? The speed of which this is happening is bizarre and shocking. But why is this all so shocking to the world in general, and even to a lot of Americans? Well, without going off into an entire lecture that should be a whole 5 hours on its own, free trade is where the world has been moving for 100 years. Well, call it 80 for sure. Push it back to 100 if you like, just because it's an even number. But remember, 100 years ago is when we were ramping up to World War II. So some countries were becoming isolationist again. Some countries were trying to throw tariffs up on things. They were trying to make sure that goods, cheaper goods from foreign countries were not coming into their country because they wanted to beef up their own industries because everybody was preparing for war. That was the lead up to World War II, the years between World War I and World War II. There was a kind of a pause on free trade. But it was even before that, for the 50 years before that, basically since the Industrial Revolution, since colonization, since the kind of global network really started once the whole world was discovered by Europeans and connected, there's been a move towards colonies trading with their mother countries, and the mother countries sending their goods out to other countries and getting raw materials in one country, bringing them to a second country to get them processed, and then exporting those goods. The move towards moving goods and services around the world has been a constant, moving in one direction towards more and more of it for at least a couple 100 years, really 250 if you like, again, since the Industrial Revolution. But let's catch it more up to the modern era right now. Free trade really exploded since World War II. Since World War II, and we almost all killed each other during the most savage period of human existence thus far, a lot of smart folks, or just say forward-thinking folks, said, hey, you know, if we all keep competing with each other, if every country's attitude is every man for himself, and every country is just going to try to do everything themselves, and every country is therefore not going to trade with other countries, the only way they can get stuff they need is to go physically take it. That's why we have all these wars. So, you know, if you don't have enough food and you're not going to free trade, then you have to go conquer a place that has food. If you need metal or steel or coal for your industry and you do not have coal and steel in your country, then you're going to have to go beat the shit out of a foreign country to take their coal and steel. And the world just had enough of that crap during World War II and said, hey, let's build a rules-based system that says, no. We're all going to respect each other's sovereignty. You know that term already. And we're also going to put this series of rules internationally into place that facilitate folks to trade peacefully with each other. Therefore, they don't have to go out and grab stuff in imperialistic ways. And we'll build this system also because it will integrate all the countries, all the sovereign states of the world will be integrated into a trade network that will make it way too costly to conduct war with each other. You're going to make so much money just creating the stuff that your country's good at and selling it and using the money you got from that sale to buy the stuff you need from other countries. If all the countries of the world do this, everything is going to be way more peaceful because we'll all need each other. We're all cooperating and integrated into one network that we need each other to do this. And because of that, just after World War II, 1947 and all the way up to 1994, the rules system that was called GATT, I love it, GATT, G-A-T-T, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. Again, when was it created? 1947, right after World War II. And it started with 23 nations, mostly kind of the NATO nations and some of the other bigger powers. And it was created to help reduce tariffs, reduce quotas, reduce subsidies. And if you all don't know what these terms are, just let me know. I'll stop and define them for you. But it basically was creating a network, a framework of, hey, don't be protectionist. Your country should focus on what you do really good, and you do it so much better that you'll be able to provide that good or service cheaper than any other country can. And so other countries will buy that from you. And in return, you will go buy the stuff that your country doesn't have. Namely, our country's really good at, say, manufacturing or textiles or agriculture. And we have a surplus of bananas or wheat. And you guys are really good at making cars. So, we're going to buy cars from you and we'll export our bananas to your country because you can't even grow bananas. That's a tropical commodity. In Germany, you're in a cold area. So that's a very overly simplistic way of description, but it's like, you get it. It's called, what's it called? Strategic advantage? No. Economic advantage? I forget it. It's eluding me. Economic specialization. Every country will specialize in what they do best, and they do it so much better that our country can't compete with them. And again, the easy one to think of is things like, I don't know, coffee or bananas. Everyone in Europe likes coffee and bananas. Everyone in America likes coffee and bananas. We don't grow coffee and bananas in the United States. We simply cannot. It's a tropical commodity. We don't have tropical climates. Okay, except in Hawaii. But we will go get those commodities we want from other places, and we won't tax or tariff them to come into our country because we can't compete anyway. Competitive advantage. I knew I would come around to it. Competitive advantage. Your country does something so good, no one can compete with you. It's your competitive advantage. The United States cannot compete with Panama for bananas. The United States can't grow bananas. Panama has a competitive advantage with bananas. To reverse it, Panama doesn't have a big enough manufacturing sector to produce cars. They don't produce cars in Panama. They have to get their cars from the United States or another country because the United States is really good at producing cars. We have a competitive advantage to produce cars. So that's what everybody has, their competitive advantage, the things they do best, and then everybody trades the stuff that they can do. The stuff they can do best, they trade to get the stuff they can't do at all or don't do as good. You got it? So the GATT era started all that just after World War II. And then the 1950s all the way up to 70s, you've got European integration. You have the creation of the European Union. It started out as a coal and steel community. Is this coming back to any of y'all that took my class? The old EEC, the European Economic Community that was originally started right after World War II. Why? Because everyone in Europe needed to rebuild all their infrastructure since they all destroyed each other's infrastructure. So they all needed coal and steel. Well, not every country had coal and steel, and not every country could provide as much as, say, their neighbor to the markets. And so instead of having everybody chaotically competing to grab the coal and steel from the places that had it, they said, hey, dudes, we're going to start a community to regulate this. And we're all going to get all the facts down on paper and be like, okay, the UK can produce this much coal, France can produce this much coal, Germany can produce this much steel. And we're going to work together to make sure that we get those commodities to where they're needed in a timely manner. Cooperation! And it helped everybody do better and make more and rebuild and make more money. And of course, the EEC evolved into even more with the European Union that really facilitated free trade between all the countries for all goods. So they said, we're going to coordinate and have no tariffs or taxes between our countries for all goods. And with the more that happens, the more goods everybody produces, and the cheaper the goods are for everybody, and everybody makes more money because they're selling more stuff and they're buying more stuff, and everybody's making more money. Then in 1995, you have the birth of the WTO, which kind of took over for GATT, the World Trade Organization, and it pretty much ended up having every country in the world join. So remember, GATT started mostly with the kind of wealthy European countries and the winners of World War II. But by 1995, the WTO, every single country on planet Earth ended up joining the WTO, except for like North Korea and the Vatican City. And so, and those two countries don't produce a whole hell of a lot. So the WTO has this now global structure, and countries could actually file lawsuits against each other. But again, it's in a civil manner. So the whole thing was based on free trade. And at any given point, the United States could say, hey, we don't like what China or Japan is doing. They're dumping steel on the American market for way too low. They're selling it for lower than it costs them, and that's impacting our businesses. That's not cool. We're going to sue them. And so there was a court and arbitration between countries. But again, it's all done in a civil manner, and it's all done in the name of facilitating free trade. And then in the 2000s and 2010s, you have the rise of China that joined the WTO in the early 2000s. And so you've got kind of every major country, every major player who's working towards this. World trade is at an all-time high, and world trade networks are at an all-time high. So for those of you who again took my class, all along the way, but particularly since the 90s and 2000s, you have more and more economic free trade blocks that proliferated because it made everybody rich. So you have the EEC, which turns into the European Union. You have this group in Southeast Asia called ASEAN. You have this group in South America called Mercosur. You have this group across the entire Pacific Ocean rim called APEC. You have the North American continent that got united by NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. And you even have one in Africa called Africa. I can't even pronounce it. It's the Africa Free Trade Area. So this was a trend literally for 80 years. And for 80 years, more and more countries were getting into the free trade movement until it's everybody besides North Korea. Everybody is producing more goods. Everybody is buying more goods. Everybody is selling more goods. Now, that's a broad statement. And yeah, maybe Cambodia wasn't doing really great. But the general trend for the planet was that free trade made more for everyone, everywhere, virtually all the time. It's one of the reasons why you have such cheap goods and services that can be far flung that you can get for nothing here locally in Walmart. Chinese produced goods that cost, the cost of stuff in America is a joke. It's so cheap. I always made fun of, we go into the local grocery store here in Blacksburg, Virginia, and get apples from New Zealand. And it's always boggled my mind. I mean, how in the hell can you grow an apple on the other side of the planet and somehow people are making money on it? Because free trade. Because the trade networks that have been built for 80 years facilitated things, and things were so cheap because it just happens. It still boggles my mind that anybody makes money on an apple from New Zealand, but that has been the trend. Okay, let me take just a TV timeout, answer a few questions here before I get to the next few slides. And Katie, you'll have to help me here because how do I control this screen over here? Is that a finger thing? So I don't know how to scroll back up on this weird-ass new screen.
Yeah, use the mouse.
I can use them. Oh, I got it. I didn't know the mouse would go from one screen to the other. How cool is that? Okay, let me catch up with some TV timeout on the lecture to catch up on some comments here. Let's see, Josh Willits in the Hizzle saying, good evening, Professor Boyer. Waited all week for this. Wow, thank you so much, Josh. The Blue Wolf says, absolutely to Wabibi. Freezing here in Georgia, says Josh Willits. Ooh, wow, if it's cold in Georgia, you know it's a hard winter. Michael Periano says, Coolio, thanks. Look forward to the rest of the lecture. Hi, Dr. Boyer from the Dark Psyche. Woo, that's a good screen name. Foreign aid as a sphere of influence, ask Blue Wolf. I'll have to come back to that one. Enjoying these a lot, says Whole by One. Thank you. Whole B. Wabibi says withdrew from the TOP. Oh, you were close. The TPP, Wabibi. You got it. JM says wasn't leaving OMS. It was the TPP. Wabibi corrected. And JMR Manolo also gets the TPP from APEC. Yep. Josh Willett says cooperation. That's right. The Asian Pacific Economic Cooperation. And the TPP, I'm sorry, I was mixing anagrams there. Not anagrams. What do you call it when it's an abbreviation? The TPP was the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So you guys were all right. APEC still exists. I don't know if the U.S. is still in it. APEC has been around for like 30 or 40 years. The TPP was the one that I was referring to. Sorry for that mistake. The Trans-Pacific Partnership was the one that the United States created back probably 15 years ago, maybe 20 now, that included all of the countries on the Pacific Rim. That's why I got confused. The Asian Pacific Economic Council / Cooperation has been around for a long time. It was a very loose organization, mostly based on free trade and semi-organization, but most of its the World Trade Organization did most of the heavy lifting. APEC was more of a talking shop. The TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, was the thing that that Donald Trump pulled out of in 2016. His first act in his first round as president was to pull out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was a much more well-defined entity than APEC. The TPP was a free trade bloc that also was recognizing copyright, trademark across all participating countries. So you had, intellectual property was protected. Common environmental laws were being drafted. I think they were even dabbling in kind of common labor practices. So the TPP was going to be a very significant thing. And it's still around, but the United States pulled out of it immediately. That was Donald Trump who pulled out immediately. That showed, and the reason I brought that up, by the way, is that showed 9 years ago what Donald Trump's opinion of international organizations was, but also what his opinion of free trade was. He has never been a big fan of free trade. He has always thought that somehow the United States is getting screwed. I'll talk about why he thinks that in just a minute, but let me get through the rest of the comments here. JM says APEC, the forum, TPP, the new agreement that ended up with the CPTPP. Thank you, Manolo, for correcting me on that. Michael Periano asked, was China in it? China was in APEC, again, a loose shop. China was intentionally being excluded from the TPP as a power play by the United States. The United States wanted the TPP to be a check on China's growth. That's why it's weird that Trump always hated it. It's like it was created to limit and hamstring China's growth. At least not growth per se, but its influence around different areas. And even at the time, I remember lecturing going, well, this guy wants to contain China, and he just destroyed an entity that was created to do that very thing. I don't think that him and his advisors really even understood what it was, but it was somehow free trade, so it was bad. So thanks for the corrections from everybody. China was originally not invited into TPP, but since the United States pulled out, I believe China is now partnering with TPP, so it's taking the place of the United States in this free trade bloc. I haven't checked on its status for a while, but I will do that soon. Maybe we'll have whole lectures just on international organizations soon. Let's see. Michael Periano says, is there a way to glean what his goals are? I tend to believe that the narrative is that he's doing this on a whim, and the destruction is because he doesn't understand what he's doing. That's a fair assessment, Michael. But I'll get to that. I'll get to that in a minute with the next slide. I don't believe he's doing the destruction deliberately. I think him and his advisors don't quite understand how the world works, or they don't even understand how human nature works. But I'll get to that. Actually, I won't. I'll get to that. I won't wait. I'll get to it right now. I think the main problem with the current Trump administration is that they've thought way too highly of themselves, and they've thought way too highly of the United States' role in the world. The United States, no reservations, the richest country on planet Earth, an economic dynamo. The U.S. is an epicenter in so many ways of so many technologies and innovation and everything. But the world has slowly been catching up. And the current Trump administration and its advisors, I believe mistakenly, overplayed their hand because they in their brains are like, the United States is not only the greatest nation in the world, it's the biggest economy, and the world cannot live without it. Again, this is not me speaking. I'm speaking on behalf of, I think, what the Trumpies are thinking. And I think the Trumpies are thinking, the world will have to cower at our feet if we demand it. The world cannot live without the United States. The world will cease to exist if the United States wills it, because we are so economically powerful and we provide so much. I think they've overestimated that, and they overplayed their hand thinking that the world will grovel at their feet. And that's the stuff that I'm getting ready to get to. So in a sense, they're right. Yes, the United States, biggest economy on planet Earth, really powerful. They overplayed it in that the world can't live without us. It's becoming very clear very quickly that the world can, and the world is moving away from the United States at a speed which is unimaginable a year ago. Unimaginable. Let's go to the rest of the comments. I see the Pineapple, who also called out the GATT. Fun fact from Manolo. Fun fact, GATT was actually promoted by the USA because of the troubles that the ITO, International Trade Organization, was facing. Heard it from a Plaid Adventure teacher. That is correct. Very good. Very good, Manolo. Rachel Dudera says, man, I miss your class. Where's the podcast? I'm here for it. We're in the podcast right now. Hang tight, Rachel. I'm getting back to it. And Jeremy Williams says, really enjoyed the Wine Lab over the holidays. Well, thank you, Jeremy. All of you who are local, come on by for a drink at Wine Lab. This podcast is sponsored by Wine Lab, Blacksburg Wine Lab. Okay, let me get back to the lecture, though. I'm sorry, podcast. We don't call them lectures anymore. We call them podcasts. So I've now talked about how the entire world has been moving towards more open and freer trade. By the way, it's not completely free. Every country tries to protect some of its industries, and so that's why you have these things called tariffs, where if the U.S. wants to protect its steel industry, it will put a tax on steel being sold to the United States by Japan or China or South Africa. And that's called a tariff. And you do that to artificially raise the price of steel from Japan, so that U.S. steel, which is a higher price because we're not as efficient as the Japanese say, it makes the United States steel competitive with cheaper steel that's being done in another country, perhaps better. Usually goods are cheaper because another country has figured out a way to do it better, faster, cheaper, and they can sell it at a cheaper price. Steel has always been a commodity that different countries have taxed or tariffed over time to protect their own industries. But the best example I can give to you good young folks is semiconductors. Taiwan produces more of that stuff than anybody. You know, every single chip that goes into every single damn phone and computer on planet Earth, I guess like 75% of them are done in Taiwan. And so they just have an economic advantage. They figured that out back in the 70s. They poured a bunch of money into it, and they decided they were going to be really good at this. And they crush on producing chips. And they have the advantage, and they can produce it cheaper than the United States can. So if the United States wants to, or UK, or Russia, or China even. So if those countries want to create their own chip-making manufacturing sectors, they have to put a tax on the ones from Taiwan to make them artificially higher in price, so that the local grown ones, which aren't as streamlined in the manufacturing base, is not as good as Taiwan, we'll have to charge more because we're not as good as Taiwan. So our price is like $50 for a chip. Let's say, I'm making up numbers. And Taiwan can do it for $30 a chip. So we're going to have to put a $20 tax on the Taiwanese chips just so that the $50 US chips are competitive. That's what tariffs are all about. Now back to the lecture here. what are the pluses and minuses for the USA in all of this for the last 80 years? Well, anybody in the Trump administration or anybody who's anti-free trade or anti-anything, anybody that disputes that the United States has done anything besides become exceptionally wealthy because of free trade is completely fooling themselves. Fooling themselves or just outright lying because they want to make a political point for their team. The United States has grown excessively wealthy because of free trade on planet Earth. We are kind of an epicenter of global trade. The United States does produce a tremendous amount of things. But more so than that, we have a big domestic market, which usually consumes all the stuff that we produce in the United States. But we're so rich because of the diversity of things we do, everything from agriculture to manufacturing, to high technology, to financial services, to whatever. The United States kind of does a little bit of everything and does it really well. We used to have a lot more manufacturing. A lot of that went away because other countries could do it cheaper, faster, better. And this gets into the crux of why it's a negative. So it's a positive and global free trade is a positive and a negative depending on the time length you're looking at and the individual country and the individual sector you're looking at. But overall, the United States has wildly benefited from free trade. Again, if anybody tells you otherwise, they're lying. The big picture, free trade has produced a lot of U.S. goods which go out to the world. It's produced a hell ton of very cheap goods made in other countries that come here for exceptionally cheap. Everything, 20 years ago, every single thing on a Walmart shelf was from another country, and it was cheap as hell. That's how they made their billions. That benefited the U.S. consumers who were getting access to every single thing made on planet Earth at the cheapest prices ever in the history of humans. That was a big plus. And overall wealth in the United States and many countries also went through the roof. Another thing that is not often thought about is that free trade is actually a great global equalizer, meaning that the United States and Europe allowing manufacturing jobs, say furniture making or I don't know, even agricultural jobs, allowing those jobs to go to other countries who could do it faster, cheaper, easier, better. It's a great wealth redistribution for the whole globe. Allowing African countries to produce your textiles. The U.S. used to produce all of its own textiles and all of its own furniture. By allowing those jobs and those industries to go to Africa or South America or China, yes, you lost those manufacturing jobs in the United States, but you got a whole bunch of the goods way cheaper. And you were pushing the United States to diversify into other sectors, again, namely technology and service sector and financial services and all these other things. So it's always an evolution what your economy is doing to make money. And the U.S. benefited greatly. Again, overall, the U.S. benefited greatly by its diversification, by the products it was producing, by the overall wealth that was increasing all across the board, and the accessibility to cheaper and cheaper goods for a very long time. Those are big pluses. And again, globally, it was a big plus because you have other countries that were poor that got to pull themselves out of poverty by creating manufacturing and agricultural sectors and service sectors that they could then export those cheaper, faster, better, easier goods and make money to put back into their own economies. So you could say, well, the hell with that. We just want to make everything ourselves. That's fine, but again, you're not making bananas. You're not making coffee because you can't. And you're not going to produce microchips cheaper than Taiwan. So just saying it's all bad because we lost these jobs. But yes, in the big picture, you kind of net positive gained for all the stuff that you got. Got it? Okay. Well, yes and no. Because now this gets back to some of your questions of why are the mega MAGAs and Donald Trump so against something that so obviously made the U.S. so much money? Because you did lose jobs, and a lot of the middle class and lower middle class in a lot of the rural areas of the United States did lose whole industries. Again, why? Because they could do it cheaper somewhere else. Cheaper, better, easier, faster. and therefore it became cheaper to produce. It was cheaper to let those jobs go and just buy the goods for way cheaper. But you did lose pretty much the entire textile industry in the United States. And if you don't know what textiles is, it's cloth, right? And that's very simplistic, but cloth is, parachutes are made out of cloth. Clothes are made out of cloth. Industrial products are made out of cloth. I mean, cars, interiors are made out of cloth. So you lost the whole textile industry that used to be in the United States. Furniture is another big one for those of you that at least live here on the eastern seaboard. North Carolina and I believe South Carolina and even parts of Virginia, huge furniture manufacturers. And all that went away because it was just cheaper to do it somewhere else. And those companies said, well, we can keep these high-paying jobs here in North Carolina, or we can go to Vietnam and pay people literally 1/100th of what we're paying workers here in North Carolina. So it becomes a financial decision from a corporation to go somewhere else. So a whole lot of things from textiles to furniture to basic manufacturers, like all the stuff that's on the Walmart shelves, the United States used to make a lot of that. Almost all of it's made in China now or other Asian countries, soon to be India. So petrochemicals, the United States has a tremendous amount of oil. We still drill for a lot of oil, but we even import oil because it's different crude types. And so we don't process as much oil as we even used to because we let that stuff go to other countries. By the way, that's why Donald Trump wants to take all the Venezuelan oil, because we have the capacity to refine all that oil down in Louisiana and Mississippi. And we have factories that used to do that stuff that have been closed. And so he wants to reopen them. And this is now, the whole thing is, my whole rant here is, that was one of the negatives. And that's true the world over. The world over, industries and jobs shifted around. And there's winners and there's losers. The net gain for the United States is huge, but there were losses. And that's what Donald Trump has been tapping into his whole political career the last decade, is tapping into that sense of loss, despair, and poverty in what we call middle America, in rural America, where a lot of these factories used to be that got outsourced to other places. I believe, and this is defending the Trump position, I believe that they have it in their heads, him and his economic advisors, that this is a good thing. The United States should exert its political and economic power to force countries to force our country into getting those jobs back. I believe the Trumpies think, yes, we should be making all our own furniture. We should be making all our own petrochemicals. We should bring the textile industry back because that provides good jobs. The automobile industry is one that the Trumpies talk about all the time. Detroit used to be the epicenter of car production in America and the world. And a lot of those factories went to Mexico because it's cheaper labor, more lax environmental regulations. And so there's reasons why these things moved around. And I believe in the core of my heart, I believe that they think they're doing a good thing by taxing the living hell out of all of the goods produced around the planet in an effort to facilitate these industries coming back to America, to facilitate companies to start back up in North Carolina, to restart furniture production, to restart textile production across the country, to restart fill in the blank. Whatever jobs were lost, again, particularly automotive industry and basic manufacturers, all that stuff is produced somewhere else now for cheaper. They, in their heart of hearts, they believe it's a good thing to destroy free trade because therefore these industries will start their companies back in America, because if you have your company in America producing that drug or that clothing line or that radiator, you're not going to get tariffed. So if you bring your company back to America or start a new company in America, you're going to be shielded from competition from the world because we're going to tariff the living shit out of everything that's coming into the country. And that is why Donald Trump has been on a tariff rampage for the last 13 months. Again, am I speaking on behalf of the mega magas? I have no real clue. But I always try to logic it out and try to empathize and think about what are they doing here? Does Donald Trump and his advisors really just want to utterly destroy the world economy? I don't think so. I do believe in their heart of hearts they think this is a good thing to bring back jobs and bring back industries to America. The question that most of us have is that even possible? Will you even find people who want to work in a furniture factory anymore? You're certainly not going to find the average American who wants to work on a farm. Everything's been mechanized and automated, and robots do stuff. And now you have AI coming in to take even more jobs. So it seems hard to understand how you're just going to bring back 1950s Americana industry back online simply by making all the other world's commodities way more expensive. These things take time. It takes time to build industries. And will you have the labor even here? Do you have people that even remember how to make furniture? Do you have companies who are even interested in building furniture or textiles or basic manufacturers here? So they're basically trying to use a gigantic hammer and one nail to build a house of industry back in the United States. And it's like that hammer is too big and it's just smashing everything. That's kind of the quick analogy I can give on that. But again, I think they're trying to do it for the right reasons, but I believe they've overplayed their hand. And now I will finish up by talking about, okay, what has been going on in the world? I was really desperate to keep this to an hour today. I'm trying to make them an hour so that they're more compact and it's more like a TV show and you can tune into it. But we'll get there, friends. We'll get there. Hopefully you like what you're seeing tonight. But I believe the Trump administration has overplayed its hand, thinking that the U.S. is completely unchallengeable and that the U.S., because its economy is so big and we produce so much, that the world will be crippled if they don't do what we say. I mean, the way that he has unfolded these tariffs really indicates a sense of ignorance is not the right word, but an overconfidence and a simplicity of how economics works. That they really thought, I will just bash people over the head and tell Brazil, if you don't do what I want, I'm going to make 100% tariffs on everything and destroy all your imports to our country, and we'll make you so poor that you'll be impoverished and you're screwed and you'll have to come back begging to us. That is simply not going to happen. And now let's get to how that is definitely not happening. So they're using too much brute force to try to force the world to do what the U.S. wants them to do, and the world is simply not having it. Not yet, anyway. The last year has been turbulent enough that countries are like, what do we do? Especially because, like, hey, we're a NATO member, but we also trade with the United States, and they're attacking us. They're attacking their friends. They're putting up tariffs against their own allies, much less the enemies of the United States. So everybody's been like, well, I guess we'll try to appease them in the short term, and maybe they'll change their mind. But a lot of countries in the last 13 months, early on in the last year, were conciliatory, saying, oh gosh, yeah, we do rely on the United States for a lot of trade. We do sell them a lot of stuff. This would be catastrophic. So yeah, we'll suck up to the king. We'll kind of do what they say it's because of fentanyl. Okay, we'll crush fentanyl. They say we're charging too little for steel. Okay, we'll raise the price of steel. So countries were conciliatory, thinking that this was a short-term thing, but it looks like that the Trump administration is saying, no, we're going to keep punishing you all, punishing the world until we get all these industries and jobs back in America. And again, that is a years to decades long process. So the Trump tariff policies may fluctuate day to day and month to month, but the overall trend of what they're trying to do with them is not going anywhere. And that's what countries are now figuring out. They're like, oh, there is no conciliatory measures we can do. They're going to continue to use this punitive tool against us no matter what we do. And so what's the point? We have now lost the United States as a reliable trade partner. And those aren't my words, by the way. Literally, the Prime Minister of Canada said it in a speech at Davos in Switzerland a week before last. Anybody catch that speech? He just said, hey, the United States is no longer a reliable trade partner. We got to go look elsewhere for trade. And everybody's like, wait, what? Canada said that? Holy crap. That's kind of crazy. So this is what my lecture was supposed to be all about tonight, and it is. Free trade is trumping Trump right now and fighting back in a new world order in a new way. What I mean by that is even 6 months ago when all this the tariff war really started, and Trump, I believe, really wants to make it a global trade war. He wants every country to do what the United States is doing. He wants every country to put up huge barriers to trade. And he said as much in UN speeches. He's like, you guys are all losers. Every country should be supplying all the stuff they need for themselves. Everybody should be self-reliant. He's not the first leader in world history who said that. Many leaders say that. Many leaders actually have said, no, we need to be self-reliant. No, we shouldn't be reliant on international trade. No, we shouldn't be reliant on getting coal from Europe or from the UK. We should do everything ourselves. It's a common theme for leaders throughout human history. But at a time that it's shocking now because it's after 80 years of continuous kind of free trade that's made a lot of countries in the developed world very rich. Again, it's been a net benefit. So it's odd that this comes at a peak of international global trade, that the people who have benefited the most from it are the ones that are trying to destroy it. It's bizarre. But that's okay. The rest of the world's reacting, saying, all righty, well, it looks like it's permanent and the United States is going to do this in perpetuity. So what are we going to do? Because we're not going to keep losing money simply because this country wants to punish us until they get their industries back. So who else will we trade with? And this caught my eye months ago. I thought, well, this is intriguing. The very first thing that I saw was out of Singapore, and this is back in September. 13 small-medium countries launch partnership to support open and free fair trade. I'm like, well, that's surprising. And it's called the FIT. I love that. You love acronyms that spell something that you can actually pronounce. FIT is a future of investment and trade. Future. So countries are looking for the future. The United States maybe is the past. Brought together Brunei, Chile, Costa Rica, Iceland, Liechtenstein. That's an oddball to be thrown in there. Morocco, New Zealand, Norway, Panama, Rwanda. This is a bizarre grouping of countries, isn't it? Singapore, Switzerland, and the United Arab Emirates and Uruguay. And again, what's it for? I don't even know. It's too new. But it says establishment comes amid strain on a global rules-based trade system. And these countries are saying, okay, well, we're actually all small countries. Self-admitted. I ain't called them small. They called themselves small. And they're like, look, we're not going to get caught in a trade war of the United States initiation that we all have to pick sides and either trade with China or the United States. You know what? The hell with that. That's what the Cold War was. And a lot of countries didn't want to be involved in the Cold War. And so these countries are saying, look, we're small countries. We cannot possibly compete with the big guys, and we're not going to get pitted on sides against the big powers. Hey, why don't we have a coalition of the stuff that we can trade with our small to medium-sized countries with each other and not worry about the big boys? I'm like, that is new. That is interesting, is it not? That is a trend, I believe, that you will see expanded. Just in the same month or within the same 2 weeks, November, China pitches itself as alternative to U.S. protectionism after signing expanded ASEAN Free Trade Pact. That was surprising to me. For those of you that took class in the past, you know what ASEAN is, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. And they were a free trade area, free trade pact that was had the potential to do a lot more. They wanted to have common law. They wanted to have common copyright. They wanted to have perhaps even a common foreign policy. At the early phases of ASEAN 20 years ago, they were actually talking about being more like the European Union, of something much more integrated. And they were doing it to kind of ward off a growing China and make sure that unified, they would have a counterbalancing effect to a perhaps aggressive China. So ASEAN intentionally was created, not it's a free trade area, but I think part of its origination was to make sure to have power united to push back against China. And so they never invited China. But over the last few years, they've increasingly said, well, China's a big trading partner of all of us, And China has been wanting to make inroads and sees itself as the next great power, even in international trade. And so China has been pushing ASEAN to get in. They've been an associate member for at least a decade. They've not been asked to be a full member yet, but I think it's going to happen because that's what this story is about, is China saying, hey, Vietnam, you just got slapped with a 60% tariff from the United States on all of the textiles and furniture that you're making, it was all being sold to the United States. Hey, 60% tariff. The U.S. is destroying your economy. Look to us. You can trade with us. And so this is a very timely, at the same time that Trump started really punishing Southeast Asian nations, China stepped in and said, hey, we'll trade more with you. We're already your biggest trade partner. And they, in November, expanded the role of China in the ASEAN Free Trade Pact. That's interesting. China definitely sees itself as taking the U.S.'s place as the world leader of the free trade movement. By the way, I'm not suggesting that's going to happen. China has lots of problems, and China is seen as an economic threat by many countries because it produces so much cheap goods and services that they are hard to compete with. So no country wants to get in bed with China all the way for fear of Chinese cheap products annihilating their own industries. So I've been this whole time ranting for over an hour now about how free trade makes everybody richer. It does in general, but there are risks. And smaller countries trading with an economic titan like the United States or China has to consider how deep they want to get in bed with them, because it's like, wait a minute, we're not trying to annihilate all our local industries. So there's protectionism still exists, tariffs still exist, but the free trade movement has said, yes, we all understand that. So yeah, we understand if you want to have a 10% tariff on agricultural products coming out of China to Cambodia. Look, we understand Cambodia if you want to put a tariff on that because, you're small and you have to protect your farmers. But, it ain't 50%. It's not punitive like what the United States is currently doing. Other stories that happen, and now we're getting into just the last 30 days. Has anybody seen this? Did anybody catch this? Mercosur, which is the free trade area, well, it's a pact between the countries of South America. So it's free trade. They at one point were really pushing to also become more like a European Union. So they wanted to have free movement of people across international borders. And they were dabbling with the ideas of a tighter union for laws and copyright and all this other stuff, and possibly even presenting a singular front for foreign policy. They never got anywhere near there. And I actually thought Mercosur was all but dead 5 or 6 years ago because Venezuela got kicked out because they're Venezuela, and Chile was never a full member, and Chile was trading more with the United States than they were with their Mercosur neighbors. And so it looked like it was kind of teetering. And you had some right-wing leaders in South American countries, namely in Argentina, and then Peru, who said, we don't know if we want to be a part of this. We don't know about this free trade bloc. We'd rather just not play by a certain set of rules, because when you enter a free trade pact or a free trade bloc, you usually then organize all of your tariffs between your countries, meaning that if you're not in an economic pact like Mercosur or the EU or the African one or ASEAN, if you're a free agent and you're not in a group, then you can set whatever tariffs you want against U.S. steel or Chinese automobiles or Vietnamese rice. You don't have to play by any rules because you're not in any clubs. Once you join a free trade pact club like Mercosur or the EU, then you have a singular set of rules that you all have to conform to. So Mercosur might say, hey, we're going to put a 50% tariff on all European wine. And even if you were like, well, I don't want to do that. I'm Chile. I don't want to do that. But it's like, but you got to. You're in the club. So a lot of countries, some of the countries of Mercosur were starting to pull away, going, we don't want to play by this common set of rules. We're not sure this free trade bloc is going anywhere. I actually thought it was all but dead. Lo and behold, what happened on January 9th? The EU and Mercosur struck a free trade zone, a full free trade zone, which between the European countries and the participating Mercosur countries is 70 million people. It's now the biggest free trade bloc on planet Earth. Dudes, that was like 3 weeks ago. I wasn't even following that. I thought that shit was all but dead. And you know why I thought it was all but dead? Because they've been talking about it for 30 freaking years. 30 freaking years they've been talking about this free trade zone between EU and Mercosur, and it never came to diddly. I wonder why it did right now. Now you're seeing the bigger picture. The European Union, overcoming deep dissension among its own members, gave the green light to a sweeping trade pact with 4 South American countries, Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay, on January 9th, creating the world's largest free trade zone with 700 million people. Bolivia will soon join, by the way. And the EU is working on a similar pact with Chile because Chile is only an associate member, as I already mentioned. And Chile will likely be joining up in this free trade pact as well, so it's going to grow. I wonder why that happened right now after 30 years of failed negotiation. You know the answer. The agreement represents a push for deeper global cooperation, in contrast to the United States turning to coercion in dealings with other countries. They're not alone, by the way. That was January 9th. January 16th, China and Canada announced tariff reliefs between those 2 countries in a high-stakes meeting between Canadian Prime Minister Carney and the Premier of China, Xi Jinping. Is this a full free trade pact? No. They decided to lower tariffs on select items that each country produces a lot of, or again, produces better, faster, cheaper than the other country. Donald Trump basically threatened these countries saying, you shouldn't do this, it's bad. And so now that we have this accelerating away from the U.S.-led free trade world, these events are starting to become more common. Canada's deal with China signals it's a serious shift away from the United States. Again, the Prime Minister of Canada said it in a speech. The U.S. is no longer a reliable trading partner, and we have to sell our stuff in other places and look for stuff we want to buy from other places, which, of course, infuriated Donald Trump, and I think I got a quote about that later. But they're not the only ones. There's a tale of 2 visits to India that have occurred in the last 2 weeks of January by 2 different entities. And I'll take the first one first, January 12th. The Chancellor of Germany, one Friedrich Merz, went to India, the first prime minister, the first chancellor to go for quite some time, did a full tour of the country. You see a delightful picture of him here flying kites with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And why was Germany hanging out in India? I don't know, perhaps to reduce tariffs between the 2 countries on all sorts of goods and services. And the biggest one was an automotive tariff relief. The Indian subcontinent has long been very independent and long had high tariffs on all goods. India, since its inception in 1947, has been very protectionist, has been very much trying to produce everything at home, has been trying to support local homegrown industries for everything from agriculture to manufacturing to automobiles to petrochemicals to technology. It has been too protectionist in terms of its economy is simply not as developed and rich as it should be. And now Narendra Modi, the current prime minister, and many other economists think, yes, India, if you actually want to get richer, you need to open up a little bit. You need to let these other companies come in. You need to let Germany sell BMWs to Indians. You need to encourage them to build BMW plants in India. And you have in the process this thing called technology transfer, where you can tell them they can come build factories, but they supply jobs in India and also be able to sell their products in India, but you also want the technology so you can do that stuff yourself. China was really good at this, by the way. For the last 30 years, China has been the masters of technology transfer. They allowed a lot of American companies and global companies to come into China and said, sure, you can start a company in China, which will provide jobs for our people, but you're also going to give us all the technology. That's the price of admission. If you want to enter our market, if you want to have access to our market, you have to build factories here and therefore make more money selling more of your product to our people, but the price you're going to pay is technology transfer. By the way, maybe that's what Donald Trump wants too. So for those that always want to bash Trump, because it's easy, he is actually taking a playbook from the Chinese. The Chinese said, no. If you want to sell your stuff in our country, you have to come build factories here to provide jobs for our people, and we want technology transfer as well. The United States really doesn't need technology transfer, but Donald Trump and his group want the factories here. All right, so January 12th, the German chancellor hanging out in India, cutting trade deals. But this is the big one. January 28th, that is literally just a couple days ago. I think it was the 27th, actually, so 3 or 4 days ago. The European Union signs a gigantic trade agreement with India, the first ever. I'd say ever in the modern era. No, just ever. Again, India's been very guarded, and they have intentionally had high tariffs to try to protect their industries, and they are loosening the reins on all that. And this is a post-U.S. world is now starting to take shape. I just can't believe how fast this shit is unfolding. The EU, again, had been talking with Mercosur for 30 years, never came to anything. The EU and other countries have wanted to come into India, have been talking to them for decades, never amounted to anything, mostly because of the Indians. So what you have now is like the EU has softened their stance to get Mercosur, and India has softened its stance to get the EU and perhaps even more trade with specifically Germany. All this is happening right now, removing trade barriers, opening up new opportunities, businesses relocating. So India and the EU have finalized a landmark free trade agreement, which the European Commissioner President Ursula von der Leyen, she's awesome, called the mother of all deals. Love it, Ursula. Aims to reduce tariffs on 90% of goods, covering a market of nearly 2 billion people. Remember back 2 or 3 slides ago where I said, the EU Mercosur deal created the largest trade bloc of all time with 700 million. Yeah, they actually just broke their own record 2 weeks later. Now you have a free trade bloc of up to 2 billion people. By the way, I still wouldn't call this a free trade bloc between the EU and Indian subcontinent, but it's really almost revolutionary how much open the trade is becoming compared to what it has been for the last, 80 years. So the agreement comes after 2 decades of on-again, off-again negotiations between India and the EU, vastly accelerated in the past 6 months. And again, my quote is, I wonder why. Why is all this being accelerated in the last 6 months? Oh, yeah, because Donald Trump has wildly accelerated his global tariff war in the last 6 months. So, these are what we call unintended consequences. But it doesn't stop there. The European Union is really trying to reimagine itself in the modern world. It realizes that between the United States and China, if they don't step up soon, they are going to be left behind. And so they have even more free trade agreements in the works. This is just all the ones that are active between Malaysia, between the UAE, between the Philippines, Mexico, even Australia. I thought they already were free traders with Australia, but I guess not. So the EU is not sitting on its laurels here. They understand if they want to stay competitive in the real world, in this modern world, in this new world, where the United States is an unreliable trade partner, and it may get worse over the Greenland situation. All trade may stop between Europe and the United States if Trump so deems it. And that sounds like a radical statement, but you all do realize it's a realistic thing to say. Donald Trump could wake up at 4 a.m. and start tweeting and say, nope, there's no more trade with Europe. You can't dismiss that. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm just saying you can't dismiss the possibility that it could. And European leaders are saying, we do not want to live in a world where one guy could completely stop all of the trade we have with the United States. We have to look elsewhere. We have to diversify. And this is having impacts, of course, in the United States as well. I love this headline from Paul Krugman, who, by the way, if you don't know Paul Krugman, he's an economist. He's a hardcore leftist. So I'm not suggesting I agree with him, but I like the headline he came up with on an article he did called "The World Files for Economic Divorce from America." That kind of sums it all up really nicely. And other headlines not from Paul Krugman, just from general reports from news sources around the world. VW halts its U.S. Audi factory. They were supposed to have an Audi factory, I think, in Wisconsin. And they just put it on hold saying, this is too turbulent. We don't know what's going on. We're not putting any more money into America right this second. German firms, China investments driven to 4-year high by U.S. trade wars. So a lot of money is now being made in the factories in China because China is not following the U.S. lead. I mean, it appears that not many countries are following the U.S. lead on this. So China's saying, hell no, we're still all open free trade. And so factories, German factories, European factories, other countries' factories in China, they're expanding because the trade with the United States is slowing. Again, that's what Trump wants. He wants trade to slow so that companies are forced to relocate factories in the United States. And that might happen eventually. But what's happening in the short term is China is making way more money because their factories are actually expanding production there to be able to ship to other places across Eurasia and Africa and the rest of the world. And of course, the chaos being created by H-1B visas, for those of you that don't know, those are the work visas for the, let's just call a spade, the highly intelligent. So, you have folks that do the high technologies and computer programmers and high finance and all this other stuff from other parts of the world. The United States has always been a magnet for the best and brightest, for people to go to college here and perhaps get jobs here, to work in those very high-tech industries that we don't have enough folks in the United States to work in them. And Trump is disrupting all that. And again, he's doing it for perhaps a good reason, at least in their minds. They're saying, hey, we're going to stop all smart kids from India and China and Argentina. We're going to stop all them smart kids from coming to our universities because they're taking the high-end jobs from our local people. Okay, I understand that. You guys probably understand that. But is that reality? If you stop all the high-end computer programmers from the rest of the world coming to America to help the high-tech companies, does that mean immediately that a whole bunch of high, smart, and super smart computer programmers are going to suddenly start coming out of Iowa or Mississippi? I don't see how that you force that issue. But again, what the Trumpies want and what's going to happen might be two different things. They might get some of it. Maybe there will be a big resurgence in kids taking computer programming in the United States and fill those jobs. It remains to be seen, but it's hard to suggest that the United States has done anything but benefit from smart people from other countries coming to our country, the United States. In fact, there's a term for it. For those of you that took my class, you all probably remember. It's called brain drain. And the United States has been the biggest recipient of brain drain. And brain drain, for those of you that didn't take my class at Virginia Tech, is that super wicked smart people try to get to the United States and or Europe to get good jobs. And they're the type of people that start their own businesses or go get advanced degrees in college and work for Fortune 500 companies. And they're the ones that, it's funny, their countries really need them, but they know they have got more promise to make more money and have more successful lives in the United States. So doctors, lawyers, computer programmers from Africa, from Central Asia, from Southeast Asia, from South America, they try to get to America because that's where the action is. And the United States has benefited tremendously from that. And the current administration now seems to think, no, those folks are taking U.S. American citizens' jobs. That remains to be seen. We'll find out. But again, that's a long play. It's going to take time for that to happen. It's going to take time for the U.S. The average U.S. student to want to be a computer programmer, want to do the things, because mostly that's not been the case lately. The STEM, what do you call it? STEM, science, technology, what's the E? The STEM folks and the STEM majors have been suffering as of late. Everybody used to want to go to college, say back in the 50s and 60s, to go to be a NASA, to be an astronaut, to start businesses, to do these things. But colleges and universities have diversified greatly since then and have all sorts of humanities degrees you can get and all these other things. And that's why the Trumpies are also attacking the university system, saying you're not teaching the things that people need for jobs. That's a whole separate podcast, though. But back to this one. The United States' mission to try to get all these good jobs back and to provide better jobs for all the high-tech industries, that's a long game. It's a long-term game. It's not going to happen in Trump's term. It may not happen in Trump's lifetime. So it's a long game that you're not going to see benefits accrue anytime soon, and we don't know if the United States can survive getting to that point. Did it die? But I should finish up now because the other things that just happened are literally yesterday and the day before. The British Prime Minister also went to visit China to talk about, again, not a free trade pact, but limiting tariffs on strategic industries and working together more. And that's the UK. Now you've got and here I got them side by side. You have Canada and the UK, two of America's staunchest allies for, I don't know, a century, who have said, well, we don't know what the U.S. is going to do anymore. We don't even know if the U.S. is going to like us anymore. So we're going to go talk to China to try to lower tariffs on strategic industries that we actually had not intended on lowering those tariffs until the Trump administration decided to start a global war on trade. So UK's Prime Minister Starmer joins the ranks of U.S. allies testing China's embrace, reads that one headline. In a bid to kickstart growth, Britain turns to China. That's from the New York Times. And Trump, responding accordingly, probably on Twitter, says, Trump tells UK and Canada that boosting trade with China is dangerous. Whatever that means. Nobody understands what that means, but I did have to pull out this quote, and I'll end on this. I don't know if you can see this on your screen, but Mr. Trump, who described Mr. Xi as a friend, suggested that Canada would likely have to give up playing ice hockey if it wanted to have a deal with China, although he did not explain why that would be. And this is a quote from Donald Trump, U.S. President. Quote, the first thing they're going to do is say, you're not allowed to play ice hockey anymore. That's not good. Canada's not going to like that. I don't know. Nobody knows what that means. But let me end on this because I was trying to shoot for an hour and here we went to 90 minutes anyway. What are the longer term impacts here? That's the general trend that I wanted you guys to be smart about when you see these headlines. My title of this Plaidcast was Free Trade is Trumping Trump, or Free Trade Trumps Trump. And what I mean by that is it's not derogatory, it's not an attack on the U.S. administration. I'm suggesting the world is moving on and moving on at a speed that is surprising to many of us. These deals signal something important about the global trading system. Countries are adapting to Donald Trump's protectionist policies and wild swings of mood and behavior and random tariffs that are being thrown out. And they're doing it not by following his model, which is what he was really hoping, but by deepening partnerships with other free trading countries. The world democracies are staying the course in terms of wanting to trade and invest and cooperate on the rules-based system that the United States itself helped create 80 years ago. What we're now seeing is a new world. I won't call it a new world order. I won't even call it a new world disorder. Everybody likes to have extremes. It's crazy. Click on me. I'm going to tell you something crazy. I don't think anything crazy is going to happen. I think this is just an evolution. And the evolution is a new world wherein multipolarity, I love that term, strategic autonomy, and even de-dollarization is taking shape slowly. Slowly at first, but it is starting to speed up at a, again, shocking pace. So it's not going to happen overnight, but I really love the multipolarity. That means for during the Cold War, there were two major powers, right? Soviet Union and the United States. It was a two-poled world. It's those guys and these guys, two major superpowers facing off. And for most of us, we were thinking that the 21st century was going to be a similar situation of a two-polar, two-power world. And it was not going to be the U.S. and Russia. It was going to be the United States and China. That was going to be the big face-off. The big competition was going to be between U.S. and China. Well, what's happening now is the United States is pulling out of the world competition, let's say. It's pulling out of the world game so quickly that it's causing everybody else to be like, okay, well, we're not going to return to a unipolar world. China's not going to be the one power that controls everything. Because countries are rightfully weary of China, especially the countries in its neighborhood that don't want to be dominated, either politically or economically. So we're not going to move to a China-led world. What we're seeing is what I call fit. Small, medium-sized countries are starting to band together, saying, "No, we're going to keep the rules system. We're keep it with ourselves." And maybe maybe there's going to be a bigger coalition of small countries and a bigger coalition of medium-sized countries that say, hey, look, we can't compete with the big powers. We're going to work with each other. And now you have a dusting off of those supranationalist organizations that many of us thought were defunct. Mercosur, which was all but dead 10 years ago, now is in a free trade deal with the European Union. And you have other countries like India, who is a rising power. You can't dismiss India. They are not what we call a fully developed, fully rich country yet. They're on the path. They have 1.5 billion people. They've got a tremendous workforce, a highly literate and intelligent workforce. They've only been behind by their own rules system where they didn't want to embrace the world. They look like they're entering this new rules-based system of freer trade. So what you have is small countries jumping in, medium-sized countries jumping in, some bigger future superpowers like India jumping in. And you have China who's saying, hey, we're all staying the course here. So we have a new world, a multipolar world, where it's like, yeah, China's going to be a power over here, Russia's going to be a power over here, the United States may be the big power in the Americas, but the rest of the world is not going to follow this path of becoming wildly isolationist and not trading with each other, because that's how you got World War I. And World War I was so fun, they followed it up with World War II. Nobody wants to see that. I should say most countries don't want to see that. So we are living in a new world, a new and more interesting world, quite frankly, from my estimation. So that was what my talk was about today. Hopefully you learned a little bit of something here in this Sunday after supper Plaid Pladcast for short. And we'll do one again next week. But for those of you that want to tune out now, that's all I got to say. But I will now try to catch up in the comment section. So thank you all for tuning in. Hope you learned something. By all means, hit me up on the emails, Joboyer, Joboyer @vt.edu to suggest future Pladcast topics. Any questions you have about this one, or if you want any merch or whatever that stuff entails. So again, I'll sign off, but then I'm going to stay here to answer questions. So hopefully we'll see you next week. Same Plaid time, same Plaid channels here for another Sunday night Pladcast. Have a great night, and as always, party on. And now I'll go to the chat room. Oh my gosh, Lisa Lasita's in the hizzle, slamming up all sorts of Putin faces everywhere. Okay. Michael Peroni says, question answered. Did I get that one? Was China not invited? Says Captain Spack Jero. Oh, welcome back, Captain Spack. China was originally not invited to the TPP, but I believe, we'll have to go Google it, but I know they are working with the TPP now. I don't know if they're an official member or if they've been officially invited yet, but they have certainly taken the place of the United States as kind of the biggest economy that's perhaps going to be integrated into the TPP. Let's see. I got Rachel who misses my class. Thank you, Rachel. Jeremy really enjoyed the wine lab. Oh, okay, that's where I left off. Sean Waltman's up in the hizzle. Wow, haven't heard that name for a while. Welcome, Sean. Great to hear from you. Hope you're doing well. Most important question from Sean: how do we get Boyer paid? Value for value. for these new weekly shows. Best geography podcast in the universe. Thank you, Sean. That's what we got to figure out. And Sean, you're wicked smart. I remember you, dude. You're wicked smart. So if you guys can suggest ways that I can get paid, not because I really need the money, but it's more about how do we, you do need money to have the technology, to have the platforms, and do all this stuff. So how do we monetize this best to perpetuate it and do even more? Love your suggestions, Sean, and anybody else who's smart about these things, because I am not. Wabibi says, isn't the extremely large trade deficit the U.S. has with China a very big concern for national security, considering how much in treasury bills China holds? It seems if China and the U.S. have a more strained relationship, China can dump the U.S. debt they hold and can affect our economy deeply. Very well said, Wabibi. And perhaps that is a future podcast, because that's one of the things that actually has been troubling to me personally. And it's not, for those of you that don't know, what Wabibi is referring to is that the United States dollar is the world standard, and United States treasuries, that is a loan, treasury notes are kind of a world standard of safeness. So lots of people around the world buy U.S. treasuries, including countries who hate the United States. I know it sounds bizarre, but it's the most solid investment you can make, because the U.S. Treasury never defaults, never, ever, ever defaults, and never has defaulted. So treat the U.S. Treasuries like a bank that's so rich it will never fail. And so if you want to put your money in a safe place and make a little bit of interest on it, U.S. Treasuries are the way to go. And foreign governments own billions and billions and billions of dollars of U.S. Treasuries. And so a lot of folks think, well, if the U.S. pisses off enough countries, they'll all cash in their U.S. Treasuries and break the bank in the United States. I don't know. I'm not smart enough. I understand the theory, the thought behind that. And by the way, Wabibi, did you see that I think Denmark cashed out their treasuries after they got pissed off about the whole Greenland thing a couple weeks ago? Go Google that. I believe that the Danes did cash in some treasuries. I don't know if it was politically motivated, but I know the U.S. Treasury Secretary was asked, what do you think about them cashing in the U.S. the treasuries, the notes? And the U.S. Treasurer said, who gives a crap? Greenland's insignificant, which is like, dude, whatever happened to civility and diplomacy? That's just out the door with this administration. So back to your question, Wabibi, I'm not smart enough to know if all the countries simultaneously cashed in their treasuries, if it would break the U.S. bank. I don't know. My instinct is probably not, and the U.S. could also refuse. The U.S. could just be like, especially with this administration, China could say, we want to cash in, $10 billion of our U.S. treasuries, and the U.S. Treasury could say no. So, if it gets to a point where the bank is going to be broken, the U.S. could probably just say no. That would cause, an earthquake across the entire global economy. If it appears that the U.S. is going to default or refuse to pay, that would be very troubling for the entire world economy. So you could be looking at, the next Great Depression. But this is all speculative. I'm not smart enough to know how that works. And I've heard the same questions been asked of like, hey, will this happen? I don't think so. Because all these countries probably understand if we force the United States to give us all this money and they go broke, the whole world economy kind of collapses. So everybody's treading carefully here. Nobody's trying to collapse the whole system. I mean, maybe Donald Trump is, but the rest of the world isn't. But it does give the rest of the world leverage to say, hey, we're no longer going to invest in United States treasuries because they're unreliable. So that's been a source of, cash, lended money for a long time. So the U.S. is definitely weakening itself in terms of being a lender, because less countries are going to want to borrow from you. Again, maybe Donald Trump wants that too. I don't know. But I wouldn't worry about that. What I'm much more worried about, and this should be a whole separate podcast. This should be a whole separate podcast that I wish I was smart enough to know the answers to, because it might get really popular. Here's Platt Avenger's fears. it's not so much about the tariffs, it's about the U.S. attitude right now of the world should cower to our feet. This administration is really determined to make everybody hate them. And it's bizarre because for years, China and Russia have wanted everyone in the world to hate the United States as much as Russia and China hate them. And to no avail. Again, the United States still has a very good reputation. This administration is really helping Russia and China, helping them convince the rest of the world that the U.S. is unreliable and that they should look to China and or Russia as leaders. No one's ever going to look to Russia as a leader, but China is really pushing this. And that's not my fear, by the way. I'm not afraid that other countries would look to China as a leader. That's just life, whatever. History goes on. Things change. Empires rise and fall. My fear is that China and Russia have also worked really hard to get the United States to not be the epicenter of the universe because they want the world to move away from the US dollar as the standard currency of the world. And I don't know much, and I hope I'm wrong. I don't think the guy who's running the US Treasury right now, or Donald Trump, quite understand how powerful it is for the United States, for the world to use US currency as the default for transactions on the planet. This brings the United States tremendous leverage on planet Earth. Tremendous. And again, this has to be a whole separate podcast because it's too complicated. But China and Russia have been wanting other countries to get off the US dollar and have suggested as much. And in fact, in some of the supranationalist organizations that China runs, like the SCO, you guys remember that from class? The Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Organization? I think it's organization. And that's a group of countries, including Russia and China, Central Asia, and some other places, that has been growing. And the Chinese, or I should say the SCO in general, has threatened or talked about on again, off again, of replacing the US dollar with the Chinese yuan as the standard monetary unit for all interactions within the SCO region. And this could, again, it's not so much about the tariffs, it's the US attitude that everybody but them sucks, and they're going to be rude to everybody, and they're going to get rid of all their allies and offend even their enemies. And it's like, man, you do not want to push that so hard as that other countries just stop using the US dollar. That will hobble the United States horribly. I won't say it's a game changer and the United States collapses. We won't collapse. But our power, the United States' power in the world, gets cut in half. I mean, the U.S. will always be a gigantic military power. We've not had to use that military power for the last 80 years because, one, it's overwhelming, and two, we have much more economic power. The world has been loath to piss off the United States or to get off the dollar because it would be calamitous for those countries. And right now, if the country after country starts to move away from the US dollar as a standard, the US does not have that soft power anymore at all. It's troubling to me how lightly the current administration is taking this concept that other countries might get off the US dollar. And I'm trying to think who threatened this. Trump got pissy about this. This might have been back in a year ago, like January, February, very early on in the second term of Trump, about a year ago. It was the BRICS. That's who it was. The BRICS countries, another supranationalist organization. The Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. That entity is also growing. New members want to jump into BRICS. And BRICS has threatened to get off the US dollar. And it was talked about, or maybe even there was just an allusion to it about a year ago, and Trump got all pissy. Again, go Google it. And said, yeah, Russia and China and India, they're all evil. They're talking about getting off the US dollar as a direct threat to us. And we won't allow it. And it's like, what do you mean you're not going to allow it? If you piss off enough of the world and they say, we're just not dealing with the US anymore and we're getting off the dollar, you don't have a say in that. You don't have a say in what monetary unit the SCO wants to intertrade with. You don't have a say in it. Unless the U.S.'s current plan is we're going to bomb everybody who gets off the U.S. dollar, we'll bomb them, which is World War III, and trade's going to really kind of be ended at that point anyway. So sorry for this long rant, Wabibi, but I'm not worried about the U.S. Treasury cash in so much as countries or international organizations starting to move away from the dollar. That would be calamitous to the U.S. economy and calamitous to U.S.'s power in the world. And again, it really fascinates me that this administration seems not to care about that at all. Again, they're all way smarter people than I am, so maybe I don't understand something, but I can tell you, being able to control the world's currency, the world's most accepted currency, is power beyond power. And when you lose that, I don't think you're getting it back. Not in my lifetime, probably not in your lifetime either. If you lose that, okie dokie. I love that. I'm back to the chat room. Hopefully that helped, Wabibi. Tim G says tablecloths are made out of cloth. Thank you, Tim. I've completely overlooked the giant tablecloth sector of the economy. JM says maybe a plan with a re-election in the view. Yeah, could be. Orange face biting nails from Tim. Tim also says, can we improve our relationship with other countries after Trump? Sure. I mean, and again, what the Prime Minister of Canada said at Davos a couple weeks ago was very telling in terms of, he said, look, this, I don't remember the direct quote, but he basically said, look, this is a rupture. This is a permanent rupture. This is a new world order being formed. There is no going back. And this is the Prime Minister of Canada saying this because he was saying, look, even if Trump loses the next election, I know you're going to say he can't run for election. I think Donald Trump will run for election if he feels like running for election. Even if Trump loses the next election and the Democrats take back over, what happens 4 years from then? I mean, these other countries are, I think it's game over dealing with the United States for a lot of countries because they look at the United States as an extremely polarized society, extremely polarized. And anybody can, and it's 50-50, and either party can win any election. And so if you're Canada, if you're the UK, if you're India, you might think, well, we'll wait it out. We'll wait out until Trump loses. But, you know, the Republicans could win again with somebody that's even more hardcore about tariffs than Trump 4 years after that. So these countries have to look at the long game going, this is a permanent rupture. The U.S. is no longer a reliable trade partner. They had a great run as the world leader for 80 years, but it's over, and we have to move on and look to other places. Let's see. So, Tim, certainly if the Democrats win the next election, they'll be falling over themselves to try to reestablish relationships with all their longstanding allies and try to soften these tariffs probably immediately. I don't know if that's going to be enough. It's like crying, the boy who cried wolf too many times, and you can't reasonably expect any country to just be like, oh, everything's back to normal again. Okay, we'll be reliant on the United States then forever. Nobody's going to do that anymore. This is a permanent rift. Darcy says, Marshall Matt. I don't know what that means, but I like it. Thanks, Darcy. Let's see. Macau 347 says, what do you think the chances are that the U.S. moving this direction will unseat the USD? Oh, it's the world's currency. That's what I was just talking about. Thank you so much, Macau. I should have read ahead in the comments. I think I need to do a whole podcast about that. By the way, I want to do a whole podcast about India because the Trump administration, or just personally Donald Trump, again, not a personal attack. He stands behind what he does. I respect him for that. I really think he screwed the pooch with India. Woo! That's why maybe I'll do that next week if you all want. Just kind of follow along with the same kind of theme of American protectionism and how it's changing the world. But India, for a long time, has been very protectionist. Kind of what Trump is turning America into. India has been that way since 1950. America's now closing ranks and wants to become isolationist, and India's opening up. And what I was referring to of the Trump administration screwing the pooch is the U.S. has been working for decades to try to break into the India market. India is the world's biggest democracy. It has the same values system as the United States. It does believe in free trade. It does believe in liberal values, but they've had a closed market. And the U.S. and other countries have been working hard to break into the Indian market because there's 1.5 billion potential consumers there, and they could be a potentially great military ally in the Indo-Pacific as China rises. So all these things were happening behind the scenes for years. U.S. and diplomacy has been working to try to get India to warm up to us, and it was just bearing fruit. Really, it was right at the point of the U.S. might be able to sign a free trade deal with India. And then Trump came in and said, I like the Indian leader, but if you don't stop buying Russian oil, I'm going to punish you. And he did, and raised 50% tariffs and completely pissed off the Indians. And you're like, wow, holy crap. Literally, you were running into the end zone on a really big economic gain for the United States. They're running the ball into the end zone and just stopped at the goal line and put the ball down and walked the other way. You're like, wow, that was incredible. But maybe I'll pick that up next week. And I got Lisa Lasita, who has jammed me up with all sorts of icons. Thank you for visiting, Lisa Lasita. Engineering STEM. There you go. Thank you, Manolo, for calling out what STEM is: science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And those, probably a lot of you who went to Virginia Tech were in some of those fields, but probably a whole lot more of you weren't. This is perhaps a whole nother podcast as well. How college has changed. College! The university! How the university has changed in America in the last 80 years. And the short lecture is, 80 years ago, the only people that went to college were STEM people. Literally, it was all STEM and medicine, law, and STEM. That's why you went to college. Everybody else just went to work. And college has become not so much STEM anymore. And this is why part of the reason I believe the Trump administration has been attacking the universities. I believe the universities have gotten way too monetary focused, and everybody in America has now been expected to go to university. I think it's a big mistake. So maybe if you guys are interested in that, I'll do a whole podcast on that. I mean, I do have 30 years of experience in the university system. By the way, I'm not talking about Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech's obviously awesome. But the university system in general in the United States has morphed wildly in the last 80 years, and it's something almost unrecognizable to people who would have been teaching in college 80 years ago. And it is perhaps not a great evolution. But if you want to talk about that more, I certainly will. Castle Guard up in the hills. Welcome back, Castle Guard, who says Trump is responding to trade talks between China and other Western countries by threatening even more tariffs on the Western countries. If so, what's the end goal? That is a great question, Castle Guard. And the only person that knows the answer is U.S. President Donald Trump. But I did reference that at one point. The very last slide I showed was basically Donald Trump threatening the UK Prime Minister and the Canadian Prime Minister for talking to China. He's like, you're no good. It's not good. Don't do it. and China's not going to let you play hockey. Sure. All right. But Castle Guard, I wish I knew the answer, but only one man in the world knows the end goal of what the tariff stuff is. And again, I'm willing to take the Trump administration and their supporters, I'm willing to take them at face value that they truly believe that their actions are going to bring back all sorts of manufacturing, service level jobs, mostly manufacturing though, and maybe even agricultural jobs back to America. And the reason that one of the reasons he's elected is because of the unhappiness of the middle class and lower middle class that lost all those jobs. These are folks that used to work in textiles and furniture factories and car manufacturers, and those jobs went away, and they've been left behind and very unhappy for 30 or 40 years. And so free trade is an obvious thing you point out and be like, and that's why you're unemployed. And that's why your town went broke, because the factories left your town because of that. Free trade, that is the enemy. it's an easy sell, especially if you live in a depressed and dying town that used to be a bustling town with a big furniture manufacturing plant, or 2 or 3 in the case of some places in North Carolina. So it's an easy sell. I get why the MAGA base, supported Trump in this move. I get why Donald Trump and his advisors think this is a good idea. I'm just not sure it's going to work. It would be fantastic. Wouldn't it be great if 3 years from now there's 10,000 new manufacturing industries in the United States employing millions of people? That would be fantastic. Who's going to say that's terrible? I don't see how that happens in 3 or 4 years. I think most economists don't understand how it happens. How do you make that happen? That's a decades-long process. And what happens in the intervening time? What happens from now, when you're just raising the price of everything with tariffs, until you have factories that make all the stuff that you've been raising prices on with tariffs? What happens in the middle? And we don't know. What does it take? 10 years? Does it take 20 years for all these companies to come back or start new companies? And what happens to America in those 10 or 20 years before they're back up to speed? I don't know, but it doesn't look good. To me, it's hard to see how it's great. It might make America great in 50 years. I don't see how it makes America great in the next 5 to 10. And we live on a very fast news cycle and a very fast election cycle. So it's hard to see how you're going to keep this plan in place, which is a 10 to 20 to 50-year plan, when the next election cycle will see your whole party thrown out of power. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but U.S. politics turn over rapidly, so it's hard to have long-term plans in the place because they vote in the next group of people, which get rid of the plan. So I don't see how it happens. I would love to be proven wrong. Okay, I hope that helped, Castle Guard, and welcome back. Holby says, curious what you think about Wabibi's question above all the emojis up there. I think I answered Wabibi's question. Let me think what you think of it, Holby. Lisa Lasita says, hello from Seattle. Welcome from the frozen East Coast to the West Coast. Hopefully you're warmer there than we are here, Lisa. Thanks for answering. From Wabibi, I can't ever pronounce this. Quote. Quixote. I'm going to call it Quixote. It says, late, but I made it. Thank you, Quixote. Let's see. Wabibi says, wouldn't having a weakened dollar help with our national debt anyway? Yes, the other thing, and again, I'm not a big monetary policy person. I don't understand all the intricacies. But if the U.S. dollar is super weak, that means it's our products that we make here are cheaper to other folks in other parts of the world. If the U.S. dollar is really strong, that makes the products made here more expensive. And so one of Donald Trump's missions actually has been to lower the value of the dollar. He sees that as a good thing. Other economists disagree with that. And you don't want to weaken it so terribly as that nobody wants it anymore. That's, the end game of having the weakest currency ever to make your products cheap is that your currency's worth nothing, and you have to export goods for pennies on the dollar, to coin a phrase. And that's what less developed countries do. I mean, do you want to make America into an impoverished country so that the goods are cheaper, but you're trying to make it richer? It's a conundrum, and I'm not going to pretend I understand all the nuances. From a Wavy, if China makes the yuan a default currency, wouldn't that make yuan more powerful, and that would make exports much more expensive for them? Yeah, again, but there's benefits beyond straight money made off of exports to having your currency as the default currency. It gives you leverage in the world. You can dictate terms. The value of your currency affects world markets in ways that are far more important than just buying and selling of bananas or cars. Let's see. I can't read this one because the font is so dark. Metal Master. EA Metal Master says hello. Hello, Metal Master. Billy Bob Hobnob says there will be no default currency in 5 years, more bilateral trade agreements. I think that's a safe a safe assessment, safe prediction, Billy Bob. It could very well be that different continents and or different economic trade blocks use different currencies, and the U.S. dollar will not be the world default anymore. And again, that ain't great for the United States, but that may be a separate podcast. Fierce Pineapple says, is it possible? Hi, Fierce Pineapple. Is it possible to take your class / access the content even if I'm not in college anymore? And do you usually stream on Sundays? New to the streams, LOL, thanks in advance. Those are all great questions, Fierce Pineapple. We are thinking about ways to put the entire class online. So the answer is yes. We are working on doing that, but we do not have that in place yet. Coming soon to a podcast near you, though. Yes, we have been dabbling just for the last month on doing Plaidcasts on Sunday nights, just because it's a kind of a nice free night for most people before the work week starts. But we're here collecting opinions and your ideas about how we should move forward in the future. I would like to do a whole class. I won't even call it World Regions anymore. I'll call it Understanding the Modern World. Let's have a new class online, Understanding the Modern World with the Plaid Avenger. That might be a class that we put online once we get the structure up. And then I also want to revamp our wine class. So the wine class is mostly already done, so that might be coming up for those of you that never took the wine class or want to take it again. I'm going to figure out a way to put that up probably first, because I'll have to have a whole lot of content creation for the understanding the modern world. I already have a lot of the wine stuff, so that'll probably happen first. And I think it'd be fun if you live in near Blacksburg that if we put the wine class online, that we'll do a weekly lecture, just like the good old days, and actually have a weekly tasting here at Blacksburg Wine Lab. That'd be fun. Let's see. So thanks for your questions, Fierce Pineapple, and I'm really thankful that you are intrigued enough to want to take the class again. Blue Wolf says, my grandfather graduated from VT in ag engineering. Dad graduated in horticulture, and I graduated in biology evolution, so I totally understand that thought. Well, thank you, Blue Wolf, and hats off to 3 generations of Hokies. Good for you all. Your family's awesome. Fierce Pineapple says, yes, Steph, interested in University Plaidcast. Boom. Hot by Holby. Hot by Holby says, thanks. Yeah, I think pointing to moving away from the USD as a reserve currency is indeed a big scary. Mike Aronson's up in the hills. What is Mike doing here? Mike says, if Turkey invaded Iran from the rear, would Greece help? Ooh. Huh. That is another Plaidcast. I don't know. That is... Well, one, Mike, I don't think Turkey's going to invade Iran. I won't say obviously. Supposedly, we are building up the U.S. military force in the Persian Gulf again. And U.S. President Donald Trump has been throwing threats out left and right. I cannot fathom U.S. soldiers ever setting foot on Iranian soil. But I can see a strategic bombing campaign because, again, U.S. President Donald Trump has discovered the military in his second term, and he loves the toys. He wants to use the toys because you can do great things with these fun toys of death. So I would look first to the U.S. doing something. Whether Turkey will be asked to invade, they might be asked by the U.S. I can't imagine them ever taking the bait. I just can't see it. That is, nobody wants to invade Iran. That's messy, but maybe that's a future podcast. China and immigrants taking all of our jobs, bad AI and robotics taking all of our jobs, good. Thanks, Billy Bob. That's a good one. Hobby says, thanks for the company while I cook dinner in Portland, Oregon. All right, we got a couple of West Coasters up in here. And that is it for me. I've cleared the comments. Thank you all for tuning in. Again, see you next week. Same Plaid time, same Plaid channel, or channels, depending on where you're looking from. But for now, have a great night, have a great week, and as always,